So we watched the overview effect last night. We had a bit of discussion about it. We're gonna this morning have an overview of our history. You can see this line here that's cutting through the boards. So it's cutting through the chalkboard, the whiteboard, and then the cork board over there. And we're gonna fill it up together. Usually we know history as something we read in books, or we're taught in school, or we watch on one of those TV channels, Discovery or something. I'm thinking that this will be, I don't know, 1800s, 1900s, 2000s, something like that. So it's the who, where, and when of our lives, of the paths of our lives, each of our lives. So we're having an opportunity to share a more personal story of heritage, of ancestors, of place, from your perspective, not from anybody else's perspective. So the question is, when and what were key moments on the path of your life? And I invite you also to look at it intergenerationally, meaning from your nenek moyang, your way back as long as you can remember, or that was told to you by your grandmother or grandfather. Okay, so you don't have to say, I was born in 1965 and I remember 1985, and you can go back to 1800s or whenever. And for those of you not born in Sabah, I invite you to talk about wherever you were born, and then when was the moment where you encountered Sabah, either in your conscious mind or in your subconscious mind, and you started to move in this direction. Okay? You guys want me to model that and give you an example of through my own story? Okay, so Neville has a map of Sabah in Neville's way with all the sungais. I'm going to give you some quick examples. Don't follow my example necessarily, but I want to give you an idea of the kinds of moments. Okay, I'm going to start. So 1800s. I was not there, but of course my ancestors were. I'm going to say this is the 1800s, yeah? And this would be the half of the 1800s. And this would be the first quarter, and then the third quarter. Anyway, what I know about my ancestry is somewhere around here in the last quarter, simply as ancestors. I'm talking about my maternal ancestors. I should say that. So some point between here and then before we became the 1900s. Both these people, wherever they came, different places that they came from, somehow met through the church. So Roman Catholicism. And that was significant as well. That was how they met. Then the other thing that was significant in that whole ballpark was this guy was adopted by the Priors. As you know, some of you know, this is the Sandakan, what was he? Administrator, something. So that adoption was very significant in the colonization of this family, of course, including these two components. The next thing that I think is really significant was, so let's say this is the half of the 1900s, and this is the quarter, and the 3/4 was 1945. And deaths, World War II deaths of 7 male ancestors. So this is Cynthia, yeah. So this includes that guy and his sons and his 7 males. So imagine lah. And that I think had a huge impact on my family as well as me, how it shaped me. And the next date I remember is 1957, when seberang Laut Cina Selatan, from a place called Penang, came a young man, naik boat, cargo boat, pergi Sandakan. That was my father. So this is Ong Nai Boon. And he joined the police force. 18 or 19 years old, very young. What I remember from my parents, because he joined the police force under the British, was they loved the Brits. They loved that time. They only have good things to say. I'm talking about my grandmother, my whole family. My dad loved serving under the colonial masters. It was just love in all sorts of shapes. Okay, so you guys getting the sense now of how to do this? The 3rd quarter, and this is the 4th quarter. So 4th quarter, somewhere in the 70s. What I remember growing up, the seas, was quote unquote piracy. And my dad always going out to sea and coming back with the boats like full of cannon holes made by cannons by the pirates. So I remember that. I remember a time when there was bombing. I don't remember which year. And I remember curfew. That was like in my memory because we were told we can't go to school, etc., etc. But being the brave kids that we were like, no, I'm going to school. And we end up going to school at the convent, the same convent that my ancestors were at. And there was nobody else but us. So I remember that. Okay, so you guys getting the feel of it? I'm going to give you 1 or 2 more examples. I'm going to go into the 2000s. You can write on this. You can also use the pins. You can pin things on it like crabs, starfish, giraffes, whatever you want to pin. I'm going to write just because I've taken enough time. 2000s. 2004. two things happened for me in 2004 that have shaped my life. I had a family reunion with, I don't know, 300 of my relatives from all over the world, from those two founders, those two people. Let's say 300 plus relatives. And we unpacked the story about that story and what that meant to us. And then we also talked about this for the first time. I had heard about it. Even my mother talking about seeing her father go and never seeing him after that. So that was very significant. It was also the year I founded Leap. And these two are very connected. Yeah. I mean, learning about this was the what gave life, the energy that came for me to give birth to Leap. Thank you. So you guys get the idea? I did a whole bunch here, but you can do 2, you can do 3, those kinds of moments that you feel shaped the path of your life. And it's personal, but as you can see, it was also Sabah's story in it. Okay. All right. So those of you who are online, you choose anybody here, anyone at all, to write or draw it for you, but we want to hear you speak it, and then they will draw or write for you. They will be your hands and your feet. And then those of you here, you of course do it for yourself. All right.
So, bahagian 80-an, banyak cerita. So, ini tahun dia kami coba bongkar ni pandemik. So, around 1800, ada 2 pandemik berlaku. Saya pun tidak tahu, dia pun tidak tahu bila itu date lah, tapi saya taruh begini sajalah. Ini satu, dia bilang, pandemik di mana macam orang mati sebab saya rasa itu kolera. So ada dalam 2 peringkat inilah. Kedua itu adalah mereka ada pandemik yang kolera, and then saya rasa itu Spanish flu lah. Kalau saya tanya, siapa dia bilang berdiri terus mati, so they don't even have time to dig the grave, so they put in mass grave di sebelah Pinampang. And also there was also a big flood, maybe somewhere here, that altered the river Moyog. Dia bilang sini semua itu sungai dulu sini, sekarang dia tidak sudah, dia bilang. So there were 3 important for me, mark the ada impact di dalam hidup kami, sebab itu menyebabkan kami bergerak di dalam kawasan Pinampang lah. So there was 3, we need to tell more of that story. And memang kami punya keturunan adalah di orang Kadazan. Tetapi ada juga kami punya keturunan dari China. Wong, dia punya Wong. So maybe somewhere in the, masih juga di 1800 darang sampai di macam lebih kurang beginilah ini. When the church came or traders came, I think it's still in the 1800s. I don't know, we have to like that. So terkawin dengan kami punya ancestors. So itulah kami sudah ada darah Cina. Mereka belajar tentang nih plowing buat samsu, what's that, talak lah, the alcohol. They learn it all from the China. Yeah. And then ini maybe flood. Ini maybe migrants lah, begini, ancestor. di mana saya punya nenek, ada ancestors derang because ada sudah ini derang pergi sekolah. So I had my maternal grandma, she's a midwife, kampung. Tapi dia dapat pergi sekolah. Dan semasa Second World War ada satu lagi important somewhere here, World War II, because the Japanese are killing the Chinese because there was a revolt. So banyak orang lari pergi kampung, dia bilang mama saya. Dan my grandma kasih jahit dia baju macam supaya dia orang tidak kenal dia orang Cina. Dia orang macam kadazan, so tidak kena bunuh. So during this World War II, then there's peluang untuk protect ada macam dia punya ancestor lah itu kan. And then juga selain daripada itu dia juga masa itu ada juga sakit macam ada malaria during World War II. So it was a difficult time for them. Mama saya masih kecil, about 5 years old, 6 years old. So itu saya rasa ada impact di keluarga saya sebab di sana mereka belajar bagaimana membantu selain daripada mereka sendiri di dalam kampung itu. Sini saya lahir. NL lahir 1959. Ya, di sini saya lahir dan jalanlah sehingga and ini saya pergi university di sini dan juga terlibat yang 1980s ini dalam ini pembentukan New Sabah. We were involved in drafting PBS punya constitution. we just graduated that time. So kami tolong derang, sebab derang pun tidak ada duit. So we young students kan, aktivis kami, graduates. So tolong ini menang, tidak sangka menang. And so we all thought it's a new Sabah lah, sama juga. Everybody thought. But anyway, tidak. And so whatever it is, soon after that we realized that ini New Sabah bukan New Sabah lah. We thought okay sudah ini problem Sabah, but we realized that tidak dapat. So in the end we form a new organization called PAKOS di sini. I think towards the 1993 lah, or 1991 kah baru kami buat nih PAKOS, because we realized that we have to continue working with the community, and so the journey continue like that lah. Itu saja, terima kasih.
And then, so the story of my grandma, she have two names. One is a Chinese name, one is a Kadazan name. So she was born, but the mom cannot hold her because they said it's panas. So she was adopted by a Bobohizan mom. So now she has two names. One is the surname Wong, I think, yang macam si Auntie Ann cakap. Yeah, related to Wong from Guangzhou. My ancestor, I think, on my mom's side is from Guangzhou. And yeah.
Seven generation ancestor ago, I know his name, Andi Matajang. He was a merchant from Sulawesi. He was a merchant from Sulawesi, and he was a Muslim preacher. He brought a Muslim teaching. Yeah, he came to Sabah and landed in Tawau and married his second wife in Tawau, in Kampung Apas. I don't know his wife, which races. I think it's Bajau or Suluk. And then he have a son there, which is we known here, Andi Laiha.
They lari dari Jepun pergi ke Tenem. But Tenem became Japanese headquarters. My grandfather was on the prisoner of war death, apa tu? Indentured labor for the road to Sok. My father is born here, 1960s. No, he's born in the war, but in the 1960s is Colombo Plan. Under the British, they sent a lot of people to New Zealand. So these are people like Herman Luping, Simon Sipao, my father. So the first generation of Sabah politicians who came back as architects, doctors, Kerajaan Civil Service. So Colombo Plan for Sabah students, including my father, that's where he met my mom, New Zealand. So my mom comes in here. And then I want to put in 1994. This is UMNO Masuk Sabah. And I was with my grandmother. This is the last one I'm going to put. I was with my grandmother at that election in 1994 when UMNO cheated and came to power, remember? And my grandmother dari Nambazan, dia menangis. Everyone is crying. And they'd be like, Pui! And she spat on the ground and she said, Mahathir, we're not Sabahans anymore. And that changed everything for me. And that's all I want to add.
So this was a good modeling of the key moments. So Ilan needs no introduction. You all know her, this radical human being. She's very humble, very simple, but as you all know, she's also Sabah's and Southeast Asia's key export to the art world. And the reason I invited Ilan is because I know she's not going to tell us our linear history. She's not going to say, remember these dates. This is when this event happened, and tell us something from a school book or history book. I knew she was going to tell us something from other worlds. So here she is with her on the floor as she wanted to be. That's why we're all on the floor today. All right, handing over to you, Ilan. Big hand.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm waving to the people who are not here. Hi, everyone on the wall there.
Hi.
I'm an artist, so I come from an artist lens. So I love stories, and I love the stories that you guys have all been sharing this morning. And embedded in there is our history, right? And that history is not stuck in a time. We live it. So we're living our family histories, our geographies histories, our environments histories. All of it happens, all of it at the same time. There is no now as such. It's all at the same time in many ways. And I think that going through this exercise of hearing all your stories kind of proves that to be true. So when we do try and formalize it and write it down and give it those dates and be academic about it, or whichever way you approach it, there is within that points that keep coming up, that parallel stories that happen, or opposing points of views. You might have experienced it on one side of a tribal war, and the other side also has a story. So I love hearing these stories. So my approach is first and foremost through stories. So I'm going to tell a couple. I've got two favorite stories. And I think that if I wrote the history book of Sabah, these two stories would be, to me, I live my life by these two stories. So once upon a time, in a time before time, there was a creator called Kinoringan. And he created the universe, like that video that we saw last night. That really, I wanted to talk about it last night, but I thought, okay, I'll save it for today. So there was a creator who created the universe. And he had a wife who was also his partner, who was also a creator and a god. And her name was Suminundu. And she created the earth. Only he made the universe, the universe was too tight for the earth. So she squished the earth a little bit so that it would sit neatly inside the universe. I think of that ozone layer. And she created a resting place for ancestors. And she created Mount Kinabalu, which is just here that we all saw this morning. And that mountain is where our ancestors go. And it's also our geography. It's our compass. I always think of Mount Kinabalu as my compass to home. So I know when I'm home, when I land at the airport. If you're lucky, when I fly into Sabah, into KK, I always sit on the right-hand side because that's normally where you see the mountain. And that tells me I'm home because the mountain, I can feel it. It's my mountain. All of you call it my mountain, right? It's our mountain. And then when I fly out of KK, I sit always on the left. So I fly over the islands. And then this foundation of the Tanah and the I, it's in our geography, it's in our everyday of who we are, right? So anyway, I sidetracked because I always sidetrack because as we're telling stories, the sidetrack, all these, like the tributaries of rivers, they all carry stories. Wherever you go, they just more and more storytelling as you journey. Every place has a story. Kinoringan and Suminundu created the universe, and they created the earth. They created Mount Kinabalu as a resting place, and they also created a community of people. And they had two children in this version that I hear. A son called Penompulan and a daughter called Penompuan. And I printed it out. And their community lived happily for many years, and they flourished and they were happy. Other stories of the Nonok Ragang that is on our timeline talks about how they spread throughout the lands. Yeah, but then over time, people started to disrespect the creator, Kinoringan. They forgot him. Life got in the way. The rivalries, all of that. But the creator became very angry about this and wanted to punish his people. So he brought on the 7 plagues. And these as a way to punish the people for forgetting him, for forgetting the earth and the universe and the environment that he had created. And this brought a period of great distress to the people. And the seven plagues are all over our wall here. So those 7 plagues are fighting, the tribal fighting, flood. We have flood written all over this wall. Drought. Somebody mentioned Kumarau, and how that is not just a drought, but how it affects our family histories and how flood has. We can just say flood, like we experienced flood last week, but it made people move from one town to another town, or they opened lands because they were running away. So we say flood, but it had massive impact on communities. Locusts, famine, illness. We have here several pandemics that created movement of migration of people in different parts of Sabah. And the 7th one, which I've always found really fascinating, the seventh plague was migration. And I don't know whether to read migration as people coming or people leaving. And I tend to think of it, migration, about people leaving the community, because that is what happened to me, and it's what happens to a lot of people when you leave Sabah. You go somewhere else to cari makan, nak pergi ke KL ke Bandar Besar. So you leave. And what happens to our storytelling, our communities, our histories, when the young, energetic people, the ones that can do something, the ones that have got a fire under their butt, they're the ones that often leave, and how that impacts our communities. So these were the 7 plagues that were brought on as a punishment. And one of the people that left the community was Kinoingan's son. So he left the community, and he was also involved in tribal wars. You can go to a KDCA website. They have a lot of this there. But also there's a lot of information at Sabah Museum. A lot of Sabah's history is not written down. I'm going to sidetrack a bit. And how, in a way, it's liberating to not have written history. We're called the land below the wind. We go with the wind. We're not locked down in our storytelling or how we tell our stories. We can invent. We can suit our stories to our moment. They can change. They're not fixed. And I think there's a certain liberty that you can take with that.
Yeah, we didn't hear the last minute or so online. Okay, try again though.
Okay. The son who'd been involved in, he was gangster dude. He was fighting with people, and he had a big fight with his son, so he left. He was one of the people that migrated away from the community. But I was just saying that in how we get these stories are from all kinds of sources. One of them being the KDCA website is the official version, but I've heard many stories that contradict that official version. And in Sabah, because we don't have our own history written down, we can change things. But meanwhile, the daughter is at home. I'm going back to my written notes. Penompuan, she was really distressed that her community was suffering. So in the version that I like, she went to her mother, the goddess Suminindu, who had created the earth. And she said, "Kill me, Mom. Kill my body and use my body as the goddess who had created earth. And in the fertility of your motherhood, make my body the 7 plants that will become the 7 foods." I don't know what those 7 represent. Maybe it's 7 being fruit trees. All fruit trees are female. All fruiting fruit trees are female. It might be grain. It might be root. I don't know how they define the 7. It's just the story I got was 7 types of food that would come from her body. The most important of these would be rice, to save the community who was suffering and to appease the creator. So the mother was very upset that her daughter would feel this way and think this, but she agreed. So she killed her daughter, and with her daughter's goddess body, her powerful superpower body, she made the the 2 females, the mother and the daughter, made both in their own ways, made this great sacrifice in order that the power of their fertility would go into the earth and it would save their communities. And then Kinoingan, the creator, was appeased. He said, "Okay lah, this is, he's lost his daughter. He's upset too." And all these foods, all these plants were given spirits, the most important of which was rice, right? So depending on your dialect, it's the spirit of Bambazon or Bambarayon is the rice spirit. And Kinoingan said to his community, "I give you the rice spirit that comes from the body of my daughter, who is now going to be called Huminodun. And this spirit must be respected. And if the spirit and the environment is not respected, the 7 plagues will come back. If you don't respect the food, the environment, and tend to nature, tend to your community, then I will return. So every time I see a hill being cut for sandblasting, I think, oh, Kinoingan's going to get so angry. He's going to bring back some plague or some disaster, a landslide. Our floods in Penampang are all affected by the way the land has been abused. In my mind, it is Kinoingan punishing us for not doing the things he told us to do, which is to respect the land. So in respect to this creation story, Sabah's land people celebrate Harvest Festival. And originally it is always about the rice harvest, but now we have less and less rice. So now maybe you say you celebrate palm oil harvest because that also feeds the communities. There's economic benefits that come from palm oil. But what else is lost in that economic methodology, if you like? And what is the role of the female and how has that changed? If we start unpacking these stories. So women plant traditionally, men would dig the land. You've been doing this in this kampung here with your paddy project. Men would dig the land, women would plant the paddy, men would jaga the paddy, make sure the kerbau tak masuk, macam tu. And the kerbau is so important to the people. The first cave paintings in the world come from our region, from the island of Borneo and Sulawesi. And what are those 40,000-year-old paintings? What are they? They're kerbau. And, what does that mean for us, our communities? What is a kerbau? It's this 40,000 years ago, they can draw anything. They draw a kerbau. How do we unpack that? How do we find meaning in that, right? So it's paddy, kerbau, all these things have relationship to our everyday. But the Harvest Festival every year is supposed to be remembering the rice spirit and Hominodun's sacrifice and looking after your community. So the women, going back to the feminist aspects of it, the idea of the women's connection to the land. Women plant the paddy, women harvest the paddy. Women are traditionally the bobohizans that looked after the spiritual well-being of the paddy. Women sold the paddy in the market. Jarang you see a man selling the beras. Kan? It's always women in the pasar yang jual beras. So what happens when women are no longer working the land? Because women don't work so much in sawit. They don't work in palm oil. So our landscape has changed. All of you are working in some capacity with the environment. We all know the social impact, the environmental impact of oil palm. But what has happened to women? And what has happened to their traditional role? They played such strong agricultural role, economic role, spiritual roles within the community. We always talk about like orangutan, but what about women? When you buy your beras from the supermarket because you're not growing it anymore, and what happens when you no longer have your own tanah, when you no longer have your own land, right? And what happens when the size of the land changes? This is, I will talk more about this, but comes in with colonialism. But just to finish off this story about how we think of the fertility of the land, working the land, having a connection with the land, having a connection with your community, caring for your community through things like agriculture. What happened with colonialism is suddenly the scale of monocrops came in. So the one of the earliest through the region, not so much in Sabah, but especially in places like Java, was sugarcane. Sugarcane, over hectares of sugarcane. And then with the British in Sabah, it was rubber plantation, hectares and hectares of rubber plantation. And now oil palm, valley after valley after valley of a monocrop. So it's really interesting to consider scale of land use in relation to the communities who work them. And this idea of a monocrop, homogenizing, making everybody the same, losing diversity. So it's a diversity that might be about ecology and that kind of diversity, or it might be the diversity of stories. These stories that are on these hectares and valleys of lands are also lost. So I find that scale of what came in and how the size of things changed really interesting, because we don't really think about size, but size when it comes to land, whether an animal has a corridor area. I mean, you guys know better than me, this kind of the mapping of Sabah, the geography of Sabah. What happens with scale? What is scale in relation to land? That's my favorite story, the story of Huminodun. When we celebrate Kaamatan in May, remember Bambazon, Bambarayon. People talk about Huminodun now. She's become hip. She's part of the Undok Nadao fashion parade. But are we forgetting the rice spirit? Is Kinoingan going to return with the 7 plagues? Is COVID part of this punishment on the universe scale, on a global scale? Because he created the universe in this story. It might be our universe here, but perhaps there is the creator is also a global thing. We are on this singular spaceship. We're not separated by, we're different but same, right? Okay, this one is very short. So I'm going to read it. I printed 3 copies in case anyone wants a copy. It's the story of Monsopiat. You all know Monsopiat. We all grow up with these stories. But do we stop to actually think about our stories, about how they tell us about our politics and how they tell us about our communities? Does the sound okay? Yeah. Okay, so Monsopiat story. Once upon a time, there lived a boy called Monsopiat. He was thought to have been bestowed special powers by a sacred burung bungang. Ada burung di sana. That lived on the roof of his grandfather's house. His grandfather was the ketua of their kampung. The kampung was not happy though. It's not a happy kampung because it was continuously raided by others, which is, all of you have talked about these raiding and why you moved and all that, right? So the kampung was continuously raided by others who they thought were stronger than them, right? So the villagers decided to train this young boy who was born with a bird on the roof. The villagers decided to train Monsopiat to be a warrior. He grew up to be a tremendous warrior and would kill all the raiders who came to his village. And he would take the heads of those that he killed as trophies. Monsopiat was lauded and loved by the villagers as a hero. As time passed, Monsopiat himself began to raid other villages. He became boastful with the number of heads he had collected. His own family and friends became fearful of him. One day, the other warriors in the village decided to kill Monsopiat. They snuck up on him while he was sleeping. When Monsopiat awoke, he was surrounded by his family and friends, and he found he had lost his special powers. No more. And he was killed by people from his own village. I don't know, maybe later you can discuss what that might mean and how we might draw ways of describing our politics now. What happened last year? Who are our Monsopiats? Who are our heroes that somehow have betrayed us or have become who have let us down or have become what we never wanted, or who have become evil, or who have become the enemy in a way? So and also that's yes, and that's to me the most important part of this story is that he was chosen to have special powers, but it was the community, his family and friends from his own village that surrounded him that took the power away. The ultimate power, the real power, was not with Monsopian. It was with the community. It was the people all around him. But those people did not see or feel their own power. They felt weak compared to another village. So they were looking for a hero. So I questioned, do we need our heroes? Or should we put a timeline on your hero status? Or like what are our heroes to us? Who are our heroes? What is the role of a hero? But then who holds power in our communities? Because ultimately, politics, what is politics? Politics is power, and it is also about communities, and it's about organizing various structures, about how to make a community function in a way, or to get organized, or to organize yourself. If you break it down, what is these politics? So those are the two stories that I always have in my mind all the time. And then I thought, for today, being an alternative history of Sabah, Cynthia, can you help me? Oh, it's okay. I'm working with weavers at the moment. And I decided, well, we need a map. So can I put next to Neville's map, another map, and it's woven. It's a very simple map like this. Can you read what it says? We all know Tamil, right? But to me, the Tamil is a geographic map of Sabah social political descriptions, for a better word. So what is the Tamil? The Tamil is a traditional farmer's market, right? So I am from this geography. I am from the mountains. I am from up near Ranau, right? And I have hill rice. I have hill products, right? And then the river people, what are their products? They have what? They have fish, they have crocodile, they have jungle people who have camphor, yeah, damai, dama, then you have rotan, then you have the plains people who have the wet rice. Then you have the sea people, where you have the fish, you have the salt, you have pearls, you have all of this. The Tamil is where the different geographies of Sabah meet, usually at a river, because the river is the highway that connects people from the different geographies, right? So, Yogi, you mentioned the Tamil and the river, right? In your timeline history, the Tamil to me, and the salt trails. So when you think of Ulu Papa, and originally there is a salt trail where they would walk days and days. They would bring their produce, and then they would meet sea peoples with the salt, and then they would exchange. So the remarkable thing about the Tamil is that the very reason a Tamil exists is for diversity. It's so that I don't have your stuff, you don't have my stuff, and then we do business lah, whether it's a barter trade or for money. But to me, this is the foundation of a social political landscape, because at the Tamil is where you gossip, where you exchange news, where you fall in love, where you fight, where you get to know who your neighbor is, where you get to know their stories, where information is exchanged. So although you may be exchanging sayuran, ikan, garam, whatever, there's much more being exchanged, and it's our knowledge, it's our stories, it's to me, the really expensive mahal thing is the gossip, the news, all of that interaction between people, the falling in love. And in Sabah, where all of us come from very mixed families, most of us, right, have mixed families. So to me, I just think it all comes from the tamu. It comes from this celebration of the other and a diversity. So I have, into the political scenario, into our way of getting to know each other, into our tanah dan air, right? The land people, the sea people. So this is another kind of chapter in my constant thinking about the history and the political landscape of Sabah. Tanah meaning earth, air meaning water, or in other words, the sea. When you put tanah and air together, meaning homeland, right? And because Sabah, we have so much war between the orang tanah and the orang air. Project IC, all these things, but people are forgetting that they are two halves. If you generalize all the orang tanah as being tanah and all the orang air as being air, they are the necessary halves of what Sabah is. We cannot be tanah air without both, in a way. And I think that it's proven by the tamu, by the salt trail to Ulu Papa, which is dalam. Berapa hari mesti jalan in those days? How far it must have been to walk. But they needed that salt. They need each other. The orang laut, the sea people need their rice grown by the tanah people. So if we start to think, if we think in the context of our now and our political landscape, of the tamu as a basis of how we create our politics or how moving forward, right? We've had such a tumultuous year this past year. We've had 2 coups in the Sheraton in March, and then the forced election in the middle of a pandemic. And Sabahans were divided. And it was a division based on racism, on prejudice between the tanah and the air. And Sabah can only be tanah air Sabah, I think, when the tanah campur the air campur the tanah, jadi tanah air. Then Sabah will be whole. And that to me is foundational. It's core. Without this, it will never work. And if you look through the data history of Sabah, the timeline, I'll add some dates to this timeline. You can see exactly how these stories were disrespected or were not thought about, or they were not included, and how that exclusion has created our mess, for a better word, now. So how do we, as much as all history happens at once, in a way, so does the future. All the possibilities of the future are with us now, and we lay foundations. So all time happens all at once, in a way. Whatever we do now will have an impact in 100 years. We may not know what it will be, but it will have an impact of some nature. So we are always drawing from from all timelines all at once. So, right, everything is political, whether we like it or not. So tarian ada music ada lagu, our songs, right? As all of this stuff happens, I'll go through this with our timeline. I think of our songs as an act of resistance. When we sing, I have lost my Kadazan Dusun language, but that is political too. So I'm going to walk you through a timeline about our karaoke. All of it is political, but let me, in an alternative history, there is a link. Okay. All right. So that was, I'm leaving the blackboard writing and I'm going into what happened in 1880. 1880 is when Sabah officially became under the British North Borneo Chartered Company. British North Borneo Chartered Company. We were under a CEO of a trading company. We were not under the British Crown, right? We were under a CEO. It was rape and pillage. In no uncertain terms. It was about what you can take. If you compare the history of Sabah and the history of Sarawak, there's a fundamental difference in the way colonialism kind of started and became. Sabah, we were under a CEO. Sarawak, under the Brooks, was under a mad gay guy, right? Who fell in love with the native boys, right? But in that process, the earliest museum in Southeast Asia was built in Sarawak because he was so enamored by Iban culture and the culture of these people that he fell in love with, right? So if you look at Sarawak early history, the museum was built by the Brooks. They had linguists, they had anthropologists, they had people who were studying culture. We did not have any of that in Sabah. We had a CEO who was all about taking our resources, right? So to me, that's a fundamental difference. I mean, you might disagree. It's a bit, but I think. I agree. Yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah. So, this is when we got a CEO. I'm going to write CEO. I think we should refer to him, or not him, there were many of them, but we should refer to the British North Borneo Trading Company as a company under a CEO, because it changes their methodology, it changes their outlook. Everything was about what resources are to be exploited, never mind your social problems. Yeah. Okay, now we go into whiteboard. So what shall I put in? Okay, I'll just put this in. So we officially in 1946. Okay, I'll just put that there for the moment, yeah? So, do I want to bring up anything here? The war was a big deal. But something that never happens when we talk about the war is we never talk about the Allied forces, the Australian and New Zealand forces, right? I'm allowed to say this because my mum's a New Zealander. The Allied forces bombed KK. How many people died, collateral damage, when KK was bombed? What is now KK? At that time, it was called Jesutin. How many people died? Do we know? I did some research and I asked an Australian military historian. KK was bombed the whole of Jesutin until St. Michael's in Dongangon. And the estimated number across that whole region of Penampang was about 40,000 people. That's what an Australian historian told me. I don't know if it's true. I can't imagine we had such a big population. But so I put a big question mark next to that. But let's say it was 100 people. Let's say it was 1,000 people. We always talk about the Japanese. But the British, not the British, the Allied forces, the Australian, the Anzac forces also bombed Sundakan. Right? So 5 towns. Which one was bombed by the Japanese? One was bombed by Japanese. So 4 by the British, 1 by the Japanese. Americans. But there was one that was bombed by Japanese. It happens all the time. We don't know so much. And we only talk about the Japanese side. We don't look holistically at how we were part of the Cold War after this war. But all of this Shell company, British Dutch Petroleum, was all about through Southeast Asia was about the British territory of oil and gas and the Dutch territory of oil and gas. So after their colonial forces, it became economic forces. So Shell is a direct result of this colonial history and is a direct result of World War II when they were locating their economic interests. The formation of Malaysia was also part of this exiting of the colonial forces. So with the World War II, try always to ask the other question of because any war, there's always two sides. So, and there's always good and there's always bad. Like the Japanese, there's also very good stories. Even though my grandfather was indentured labor and he built that straight road on a chain gang, right, in near Keningau, Swap, yeah. The Japanese were also kind to our family. Like my grandmother would give them food. They would not hurt, because my grandfather was Chinese, so they went after the Chinese, right? But there was also kindness. So if we start to look at stories, what are the good and the bad on both sides? But also the context. So it's a global war. So how has the global aspects of the war impacted us? A direct impact was economic. So the CEO, the company, all the 5 major cities were bombed. So they lost their infrastructure and they could not afford to rebuild. So that is why in 1946, North Borneo became a British Crown colony. So we were colonized all this time, but this is only when we became officially a colony under the British Crown directly, because they could afford to deal with the mess post-World War II. This is already in our living memory. Like my father was born in 1940, so this is already within our family memory. I put this, when we were telling stories just now, I put this in. So this is late 50s into the late 60s. There's a British, as the British were exiting their colonies, one of the initiatives that they started was called the Colombo Plan. And these were for all the British territories around the world, and bright sparks that they found from all the kampungs. And where did those bright sparks come from? Where did they get their education? From the missionaries. So the missionary, like my father went to St. Michael and then La Salle. First, he went to a Chinese school in Tenom. And then he went to St. Michael in Penampang, and then La Salle. But here you have missionaries. A big part of the missionaries' legacy is education. Who wrote this? Yogi. So this happened across Sabah. So those young people that had started going to school under the church, usually Roman Catholic, ended up within the Catholic schools. Some of the brightest ones ended up under Colombo Plan. And the Colombo Plan was designed by the British to educate these young people to become architects, doctors, engineers, civil servants, lawyers, who they would pass the power baton onto them as they were decolonizing. But when you slow down and you think about that, they were creating their own allies within the ex-colonies, people who would speak their language, literally English, and also that they would have connection with, that they would have fond times as a student back in the day. And either the countries were, if I'm not mistaken, England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. There's a 5th one. 5 countries. They were sent all over these places. So my father being one of them, and he wanted to become a doctor, but he was forced to study political science and to enter the civil service, because now Sabah needed to make its own politics, its own administration, exactly, and its own professional class to run, to become civilized and to become a modern nation state, right? I found it really interesting. None of you in your storytelling mentioned 1957 as Malaya's Merdeka. Only Malayas, nobody else. And none of you mentioned 1963, the formation of Malaysia. No, it's not important.
Yeah, I know.
Well, as a Freudian, but I found it really interesting that all of these people, none of us, we mentioned these 2 dates. So 1957, I think it was just generally in the news. It had tak kena menanga at all with us. It had no bearing.
We are peasants. We are not the political leaders.
Yeah, but when Malaya dapat, maybe we thought, oh, now maybe ada inspirasi. Maybe we thought, oh, they got their Merdeka dari the British. Maybe we can too. There was a lot of radicals in Keningau, maybe who were fighting the British, kan? Ramai di Keningau, especially the Murut community. So many stories of them. Yeah, Gun Sanad, So maybe Merdeka had an influence to Malaya's Merdeka had an influence to start thinking about becoming our own sovereign state. I would love to know. I wish that there was more documentation about what was in their mind. There is one book which I will come to. Don't let me forget. And then, so formation of Malaysia. Super changed our world.
Yeah.
Formation of Malaysia was formed by 4 signatory territories, meaning that there are 4 signatures on the document. Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, Sarawak, right? That means that Sabah is a signatory territory, right? To form Malaysia. Malaysia did not exist. Malaysia never won independence. Malaysia never had Merdeka. Why? Because Malaysia was formed and created, right? There's an important small difference. On the formation of Malaysia, yeah. On the formation of Malaysia, what became the British, what was British North Borneo, had 5 options to choose. There were 5 options on the table. The proposal was join with Sarawak, Singapore, Malaya, buat Malaysia, option 1. Option 2, satu Borneo. So satu Borneo British territories, meaning Sarawak, Brunei, Sabah. Option 2. Option 3, join Indonesia. Option 4, join Philippines. Option 5, independent Sabah sendiri. Our leaders chose to form a new country called Malaysia. And this is still a confusing subject that we still all trying to understand why they made that decision. What were the promises made? Apa?
After some time, Donald Stephen said we were cheated.
He said it very fast. He said it in 1965. 2 years later, Donald Stephen questions. What happened? What happened in 1965? Sorry, I'm writing on other people's writing. Singapore left. Exit Singapore.
I was born.
Oh, that's lebih penting. Yeah. So 1965, Singapore leaves the Federation of Malaysia. Then contract broken. So contract broken, contract broken. So in my mind, Malaysia doesn't exist. Kan? I mean, in terms of like corporate law, if you break a contract, you break a contract. Which is exactly what Stephen Kalong Ningkan in Sarawak and Donald Stevens said. Contract broken. We all have to renegotiate. We have to either form a new contract or we all exit. This is 1965. But that negotiation did not happen. So this is, in my mind, and I will get in trouble, but I don't care. This is where the recolonization of Sabah actually started, was 1965. The Malaysia dream of this new amazing country lasted 2 years. But the second most significant after 1963, I think, was the year of 1976. Everything happened in 1976. Here, 1976. Okay, so what happened in 1976? Early 1976, there was a Sabah election, and Donald Stevens, who had been in power, and then after his trouble with the 65 arguing dengan Tunku Abdul Rahman, he was given various posts. After that term as CM, he ended up spending some time in Australia as an ambassador, I think. But he won the election under the Berjaya flag in 1976, early. So we're talking February, March. This is where we break down this long timeline into 1 year. What happened in 1976? So February, March ada election. He's sekarang Tun Fuad Stevens. No, he's Fuad Stevens. Belum Tun, I think. Fuad Stevens menang. Berjaya. Yeah. And then June, we all know, somebody wrote it. It's not the double tragedy, it's the triple tragedy, it's the devil. Okay? Let's make it dramatic, because it is. So the 6 of the 76 is the plane crash.
We have
So the plane crash, 5 cabinet ministers die, including Fuad Stevens. 5 ministers, right? Including all our heroes, who were at that point in their lives betul-betul heroes. They were not like fallen heroes, they were heroes, right? Peter Majuntin, you know. So what the plane crash happened on Fuad Stevens and a plane load of people from Labuan when he refused to sign the Petronas oil and gas deal, right? We all know the story. So 1 week later, what's 6th of June plus 7 days? Huh? Okay, I'm not exactly sure if it's the 13th, but it's lebih kurang. So I'm going to write here because I'm not sure. 1 week. So 1 week later, the person who replaces Tun Fuad is Haris Saleh, under the Berjaya Party, Haris Saleh. I have to tell you something, because personal histories. So my father, who studied political science under Colombo Plan to become Orang Kerajaan, was working for Fuad Stevens at the old Secretariat building dekat Sabah Museum. The emergency meeting on the 6th of 6th, 1976 was in my father's office. So I asked him what happened. And I remember that day because I was 5 years old. I was at Wei and G's birthday party on Signal Hill, whose father worked for Shell, right? Everything is political. So even the Shell, we can talk about the political history of Shell. Shell also had a Colombo Plan. A lot of scholarship is under Shell. Celestine Gino is Shell, I believe, I think. So the shell, because the father of the 5-year-old that I was at the birthday party on Signal Hill, overlooking the whole of KK, he's the boss of Shell, big company. He gets a phone call. There's been a plane crash. In those days, no mobile phones, right? So the first news, my mom was with us. My dad was at church. The first news was that it was on a Sunday. The first news that we got, or my parents got, was from the Shell company calling the father at this birthday party. And then people had been trying to call my father. And then somehow or other, my dad went home and he got a phone call. He has to go to the office. So he went to the office and he said he remembers Fuad Stevens' brother, crying uncontrollably. He had to ask him to go to another room. And so the immediate emergency meeting was in his office. And everyone was in shock. They didn't know what to do. But they just had, where am I? They just had the election. So everyone was in town because they're about to have the swearing in at the Astana. So my dad said the Sarawak chief minister at the time, I can't remember his name right now, he was in KK for the swearing in ceremony he was going to attend. But the whole of the Sabah cabinet was in such a shock. They didn't know what to do. It's actually the Sarawak CM who started helping to organize people. What do we do now? Because everyone was so shocked. So I always found that really, this was when Sabah and Sarawak used to talk to each other. And they used to have these interstate, there was an interstate closeness. Yeah. So what's his name? Yeah. No, the Sarawak. So he actually was, my father said he was a major, he took over a lot of the, what do we do now? How, like, everyone was too shocked to do anything. And then after my dad's office, they moved to the ground floor of the Secretariat building where they went into the emergency operation plan. But anyway, 1 week later, my father wrote Haris Saleh's appointment letter for the Astana. And he also wrote the condolence letters to Tok Puan Rahimah Stevens and all the families that ada orang meninggal. So it's not signed under, it's signed by Haris Saleh, but they were written by my dad. So personal, everything, it's in me. I was at a birthday party. We rushed home. When I went to St. Agnes when I was 6 in primary 1, people's at St. Agnes in Likas, my classmates' fathers had been on that plane. So it impacted me. And our political landscape has never, our Sabah political landscape, because my father was civil service, has always been in my being, right? I can't separate it from who I am. So 1 week later, Haris Saleh signs exactly what Fuad Stevens didn't sign, which is the Petronas oil and gas, where we get 5% royalty only. Fuad Stevens wanted 20%, but Haris Saleh, young man, we don't know what happened, signed the 5% deal. Actually, Haris Saleh to me is one of Sabah's best CMs. He's the one that was the most inventive in terms of agriculture. Even Sabah Oil and Gas, Safoda, all Lika Sports Complex, Desa Farm, Sabah Tea, it's all under Haris Saleh. But because of this, it's tainted his legacy because he signed that, and also because of Labuan. These are the two black marks to Haris Saleh. But when you look at the Tanah dan Air, if you look at all our early political parties, Berjaya was a party that tried to bring the Orang Tanah and the Orang Air together. That's the first time that there was an element of that before they all split into the USNO and the PBS. And okay, so 1 week after 6th of June, you know what happened on the 13th of July? 1976. We all finished our storytelling at the plane crash. What happened after the plane crash? This is like drama minggu ini. It's a long series, right? You just stop halfway through so 13th July 1976. This to me is the biggest, it's a huge date. You know what happened? At a parliamentary sitting in KL. So everyone, how many days? It's not even a month after it's just over a month. It's 5 weeks, let's say, agak-agak, after the plane crash. There's a parliamentary sitting. People are in a state of shock and mourning, right? These are the biggest names in Sabah politics at the time, wiped out, right? There's a parliamentary sitting. You know what they discussed in the parliamentary sitting? You know what happened on this day? This is the day it was raised. If you raise the parliamentary Hansard, that's the day you look up. That is when the signatory territory of Sabah that signed the Malaysian agreement to the formation of Malaysia, one of 4 signatories, we became one of 13 states on this day. And when you look at the parliamentary Hansards, there's no objection. Our leaders didn't say anything. For me, I understand because of the mourning and how that must have been so disempowering that you feel that you cannot do anything. It must have been extreme. I do wonder why Sarawak parliamentarians, however, agreed to this. Because even our TYT, Yang di-Pertuan Negeri Sabah, dulu, he's Yang di-Pertuan Negara Sabah. We went from being a country and a territory to being a state, one of 13. We're the same as Perlis, which is the size of one district. Yeah.
Even smaller.
It's the size of some people's oil palm estate is bigger than Perlis, right? So to me, this date is when another form of colonialization happened in Sabah, and we've been fighting our way to find ourselves, our territory, our negara, our sovereignty, our self-determination ever since, in my mind. I love how on this board, a lot of your storytelling, I've spoiled it a bit now, but there was a density of writing where significant things happen. So I really love the word New Sabah, this one, with PBS, 1985. 1985, okay, 9 years. So Haris Saleh had been in power for 9 years, from 1976 to 1985. And he did, I will stand up for Haris Saleh because he did so much good stuff, so much diversity of industry, and also that he was Tanah Dan Air. There's a lot of good. So balance all, despite the fact that he signed the Petronas deal, despite what happened to Labuan, Haris Saleh did good. I really want to stress that. When you look at what our political leaders did, actually Haris Saleh was very, very busy and industrious and inventive. Even now, he's the one that's planting billion plantations and thinking into a future time. He's still, there's a lot to admire about Haris Saleh. But big falling out between Haris Saleh and Joseph Paring Kitingan, who formed PBS, Parti Bersatu Sabah. Even the name wanted the Tanah Dan Air. It wanted to Bersatu Sabah. So I'm going to write it down. Parti Bersatu Sabah. And at this time, PBS is aligned to Barisan Nasional in Kuala Lumpur. It was aligned to Mahathir. Mahathir became Prime Minister in 1982. Worth putting in. Mahathir. PM. 1982. But Mahathir and Pairin really don't like each other. They lawan, a lot of fighting. So in the 1990 election, this is when PBS officially became an opposition party, left BN. Okay. In 1985, now we have Mustafa also to talk about. Tanah dan I. Mustafa was I. Pairin was Tanah. It was orchestrated, I think, a lot of people think, from KL, from Mahathir, to Sabah is so wealthy that KL needed to always not to make sure that Sabah wasn't whole, that Sabah is lemah, weak, to stand up to KL. So PBS was kind of doomed to become, PBS wanted to be the whole of Sabah, but it kind of became a party orang tanah. So Mustafa comes in, manipulated by KL. 1 year later, 1986, is the riots. And after the riot, PBS never had peace as a kind of party because of the animosity between Sabah and federal government. So in those 9 years, federal funding became minimum. No electricity infrastructure, no water infrastructure, no roads, hospitals, schools. Funding was cut to a basic minimum. Just before the 1990 election, Jeffrey Kittingan is placed under ISA, Internal Security Act, 2 years without trial. So Jeffrey Kittingan. Ini one of our Monsopiats. ISA. Jeffrey Kittingan is talking about Sabah independence, about Sabah autonomy, about sovereignty, about self-determination. So he kena ISA, right? 1990 election is when they officially became opposition, and then it's full-on war with KL. People, I remember this period very, very clearly. I remember the joy of 1985. I remember the riots of 1986. Both my parents were at the Astana during the 1985. They were in the Astana. My mom was looking after Alex and Daniel Kittingan, Pairin punya anak, and they were all gathered there, locked inside the Astana, Sri Gaya. 86. My sister was at the first year of Maktab Nasional. Started by my mom and others, funded by the church for a new school. And Maktab Nasional at that time was next to St. Francis, between Sacred Heart Cathedral and St. Francis. And my sister was under her desk because the riot was outside the school. And my father was at Yayasan Sabah looking at the smoke, and my sister is right there. So personal memories are embedded within all of this. 1994, another general election, a Sabah election. Now Mahathir is desperate to get Sabah for UMNO, desperate. So meanwhile, Mustafa, Usno, all of that, we didn't have UMNO, we didn't have MCA, we didn't have those Semenanjung parties. Till 1994, 1990, they're contesting, but they lost. And you have to imagine what it must have been like. You guys were there, you can tell us what it's like. But there's federal funding is cut off, there's no development infrastructure, no schools, hospitals, essentials, right? And they still voted for PBS. They still voted against Mahathir and federal government. And PBS still won, despite the fact that there's minimal federal funding. Then 1994, same thing. There's stories of T-shirts thrown out of helicopters with $100 bill in a pocket. Stories of fishermen being bought outboard motor. The amount of corruption was out of this world, right? And they still lost the election in 1994. PBS won that election. And then the party hopping. And it was because of party hopping, rumors of money, that UMNO came into power in Sabah. UMNO masuk Sabah. And again, I finished university by now. And I remember this election, my grandmother going, "Pui, mate." And I understand in that context of the last 9 years, as an orang, she was illiterate, but she would read her Bible, her Malay Bible, Malay language. But she was illiterate, so I don't know how she read her Bible. But I think it's like just pegang, yeah. She's the one that said to me, "We're not Sabahans anymore," and her voice rings in my mind, you know. Or what does this mean? Do we need to be Sabahan? Are we Malaysian? Are we Sabahan Malaysian? Like, what is our identity? Who are we? You know, they're kind of obvious questions, but how do we identify ourselves of who we are? All these kinds of. So this was deeply personal. And by now I'd already graduated university. So I was a grown up already. I had a brain, you know, I was thinking. And then it started everything you can imagine to disenfranchise and disempower the Sabahan. So this is when the beginning of the 2-year rotation system for the chief minister, nothing happened, nothing got done. La di da di da di da. Sampai Musa. I'm not even sure when Musa came to power. To me, I kind of, after this, it becomes one blur. Yeah. It becomes one sameness of a disempowered Sabah, of how to become politically charged again. Meanwhile, 1994, I moved to KL, if I put in my personal storytelling. So, Kinoingan, the 7 plagues, migration, I was one that left my community. And I still wonder to this day, what might I have done if I'd stayed? But I wanted to learn. I'm an artist. I need other artists. I didn't have friends. And I worked in the film industry. There's no film being made. I need to talk about media, especially for Nadira. Here, 1970s. I'm going to talk in a minute about how do you colonize someone. But the 1970s, something really significant that impacted Sabah. Our indigenous languages, our vernacular languages, how many languages do we have in Sabah, were discouraged, not banned officially, because you can't, but is discouraged. So kind of banned, but without using the word ban, from radio and television, from being taught in schools. That's why I was born in 1971. That's why I don't speak Kadazan with my grandmother. I speak Malay with my grandmother. The official homogenizing language that kononia makes you Malaysian. It's the oil palm, a blanket over the valleys to make you one, to make you the same, to remove the diversity in the valleys and the landscape, to make one story, not many stories. So we lost our language in the 1970s, especially the mid-70s, when our local languages were discouraged from media. Also in 1976, the tragic year of 1976, you know what happened in Sarawak? So this year is like the blackest year for Borneo, for Sabah. Dewan Bahasa Pustaka in KL, where the country is only 13 years old. 1963 formation, 1976. How to make those damn Borneans Malaysian. because the Sarawakians are Sarawakian, the Sabahan, so many languages, so many kaum. We have to make them Malaysian. They have to think like Malaysians, speak like Malaysians, dream like Malaysians, right? How do you do that? One of the things that Dewan Bahasa Pustaka, which is our literature institute that keeps our written word, our poetry, our books, right? 1976 in Sarawak. Prior to this, one of the things left behind by the British from the British Crown came in post-war in Sarawak as well. So one of the things that the British did was to set up the North Borneo Literature Bureau. And the job of not North Borneo, the Borneo Literature Bureau, BLB. So this is post-war, British Crown Colony, British Literature Bureau. In 1976, Dewan Bahasa Pustaka, first of all, they took all the Borneo Literature Bureau books and they buried them. Borneo Literature books function was to document vernacular languages and vernacular storytelling from all the peoples of British Borneo. That means Sabah and Sarawak, right? There is one book there that was published in the early 1960s, written in Kadazan about the Kadazan view of the formation of Malaysia. And I've never seen that book. I really want that book. I collect Borneo Literature Bureau books. They all have minimum 3 or 4 languages, including things like recipe books, cookbooks, including school textbooks for, like, I collected the art class, volume 1 and volume 2, fantastic art textbooks published by Borneo Literature Bureau, fantastic books, a lot of folktale storytelling, documented in multiple languages. 1976, first they buried the books, somebody came and correct and take them all out. Then Dewan Bahasa Pustaka Malaysia burnt the books, allegedly. So the entire stockpile of this knowledge and books was burnt. It's been written about, you can Google it, and they always use the word allegedly. So I will tumpang that too, because I don't know. I learned from reading what other people, but there's direct accounts about what happened. So it's worth Googling the history of the Borneo Literature Bureau. So books burned. That to me is cultural genocide. It's knowledge being burnt, right? So why? So that we become oil palm, to be harvested as one resource crop, not the diversity that we are. I'm getting lost. Okay, so money. And then 2018, let's do this. 2018, such a huge year. So I'm already in KL. I come back from my personal history. I come back 2016. See, I can tell my story because I got the privilege of a pen. I had the privilege of a storyteller, right? So my story, our story, but so I come back to KK here. So, but I vote in Sabah. But this election was huge all over the whole country. Then you have this party called Warisan. Okay, Tanah dan Air. I don't know Shafi Akbal. I don't know what to think of him yet. With not enough time to figure him out. I don't know. The one thing that I like about Warisan is Tanah dan Air. Iku Tanah Air. If Sabah is going to address our problems, we need to, the orang laut, who are the orang laut? The Bajau, Ilanon, Solok, all of that. The orang tanah, Dusun, Rongos, Moro, only when all of them come together and talk to each other and understand each other and overcome their prejudices, can we try and find solutions. I don't think we can if these two fundamentally demographic groups don't come together. So this kena squash 2020. Squash tanah dan air. It's macam the same. So we balik sini. So it is, we're stuck in a cycle, a repetitive cycle.
Like the plague.
So how do we break that going forward? Okay, I don't know about time, but I nearly finished. I just want to talk about one more thing. In a political landscape, because it comes from our history, it's our now, it's also our future. How do you colonize someone? If we know how you get colonized, maybe if we know that, we can uncolonize ourselves and we can take back our agency, take back decide what we want, decide who we are, decide who our neighbor is and whether we want them to be in our imagination or not. But in order to do all these things to be able to move forward, ever since the colonial times, maybe even before, because even before colonial times, we had the Brunei Sultanate, we had the Sulu Sultanate, we had powers also making decisions for us. When the decision to make Malaysia was made in 1963, Sabah people were scared. They decided to form a new country because they were scared of the Sulu Sultanate. But they forgot that a sultan is only a sultan kalau you daulat tuanku. Kalau you tak daulat, you tak daulat. It's not a sultan. He's only there's the people always have the power. Even within the adat Melayu yang ada sultan, it always is up to the people. The people decide. But we're too scared to speak for ourselves or to say what we want. I think so that we in a way we're finding easier, not easier, but other options. But anyway, how do you colonize someone? I think it's a really important question we ask ourselves, and also in all our projects, to make sure that we do not do it. To me, you colonize someone through the violence of administration. More violent than a gun is admin. I teach you in your schools. I make a map. I tell you what is in your river. I give you data, right? I tell you my data that I tell you who you are. I give you a name. You use the name I give you. I make a census. I make a museum. I make all these things that tell you what is important. It's admin. It's not a gun. It's not a weapon of force. It is admin. And to me, admin, as we work in our daily life, why I'm sitting on the floor, why I'm working with Tika now, dulu, that born, we didn't have tables. To me, the table is a symbol of colonialism and admin power. We sat on the Tika on the floor, kita di atas tanah. The only people that are not on the Tika di atas tanah is the Sultan, who's raised, ada pelamin macam tu. Tapi di atas pelamin ada juga Tika. And then mungkin ada dulang dengan your sirih macam-macam. Your Quran is not on the floor. Your Quran is on a stand. It's not on the ground, right? But other than that, we didn't have tables traditionally. Mana ada meja. The word meja in Malay comes from the Portuguese word mesa. Even the word for table is a colonial word, right? In Tagalog, in the Philippines, mesa is also the table. It comes from the Spanish. So whether the Portuguese or the Spanish, mesa equal meja. It's even in our language, our linguistics of our colonial history is there. When I ask people what is the name of the Tika, every kampung I go to has a different name of a Tika. It's so many names of the Tika. everyone uses the word tika as a generic name, a Malay word, but every community has a different name. Apin, Galumkat, yeah. I want to do a collection of the names of tika, actually. So to me, that table, we talk about, especially in sort of feminist storytelling or feminist perjuangan, we talk about getting a seat at the table. But in my mind, I said, no, we don't want the table. You take the power and you put it on the mat. And I think all of you that work with communities, that is what you do. You get rid of the table. You get rid of the violence of administration. You go to the floor. You sit on the floor. Everyone is equally uncomfortable. Semua bergerak macam ni, right? One bum cheek to it. And you lie down, or you lie on your friend's lap, and you find your comfort, and you're all equal. There's nobody else yang lebih pangkat. You're the same. You're all equally the same. And the amazing thing about Atika, I mean, we all experience it. Kalau tak cukup tempat, you tambah lagi satu tika. It's a democratic space. It's egalitarian. It invites people to come and sit on the tika, and it is a platform that gets activated. Something happens on the tika. You sleep, you eat, you work, you might dry ikan bilis, whatever it is, it's a space that gets activated. So right now I'm doing a lot of work with tika in my artwork because of this conceptual idea of what a tika represents in my political language of claiming back architectural space of action. So whatever action it might be, whether it's eating or whether it's a political meeting, or whether it's a community project, I think we should sit on the tika. And I think on that happy note, I might end. How's the time? Too long, too short?
You should see what people are saying online. That's what I was reading. They said this needs to be recorded, this needs to be taught in schools, etc., etc. So you're getting. Am I the only one who has goosebumps? Says Ryan. He's from Sarawak, so he's not the only ones.
I love how your stories are inside this timeline everywhere. It's embedded in there. There's no separation. Everybody. So the personal is deeply political, and in a way, we have to make the political personal, because it's not. I think. I need to put a clause to all of you to everybody, that I also cerita, that I'm not necessary. There's scientists here. I was saying to Ken last night, I have so much respect for scientists, but I'm scared of scientists because of your factual data. And a lot of what my world is not data in that sense. It's another kind of data. So, but I find it very intimidating to talk about, because I'm never sure. It's me, but it's what I think, but I'm not sure if I'm right or not. But that's what I think lah. So it's a kind of clause, but I think I'm right. I think all of us are right. I think all our stories are right. And to me, that's also the power of art and language, because you're communicating. And I don't think we communicate enough of our stories. And our history is embedded within our stories. All your stories here already show the data info. Yeah.
So this was the history experience that we had envisioned. It was not going to be, this happened in 1910 and 1950 and 1960. We wanted history to become personal. And then from there, we would see our collective story. It would just emerge. And as you can see, this could be a multi-year project for a team to go all around Sabah, talk to people, talk to different generations, and hear the stories, record the stories. However, whatever that would look like. This is just the beginning. We continue the journey when we talk about the development trajectory. As you can see here, it's already telling the story of how did we develop? How did the economy develop? How did power and politics shape economy, and economy shape power and politics? Yes? So we're going to go over there and we're going to do that. We're going to map that later. But really, it's a sort of mirror of this. So from looking from the personal, and then it became the economic, it became the social, it became, where we are today. Bah, come. Chit-chat saja.
For me personally, I've always, in the last maybe 5 years or so, I've always felt like I'm almost a finished product of federal powers' attempt to wipe out, the history of our homeland. So it's been good lah to remove whatever I've learned previously and just relearn the actual history of Sabah.
Thank you, Ilan, for putting the kind of a structure a little bit lah to understand. For me, the work that will also give frame to weigh other things that probably in my work now in this movement. But I remember you put there in the late 1950s and 60s before the Merdeka lah. And then that's the time where British wants to, what do you call that? Continue the legacy kan, of sending people to educate. I remember, I think my father was also offered to go for this study, but he didn't go because he has his own plan to make more of us. So there was like 13 of us, 12. I mean, I'm just trying to put that, whatever that's big picture into the small one and what he might have thought lah.
Imagine if he had not done that.
Yes, he might met another person. Yeah, but they have their love story lah, my mom. And my mom, of course, I think she is more, I think, the person on the ground who wants to, when I talk to her, she will talk about all this problem of the ancestors, the drought, all these kind of things that apa kan. But my father will talk on education and also to think about the future. Yeah, and innovate and be resilient and all these things. So I guess all of us different, born in a different timeline. Maybe Anne, I was just primary one probably in 1976, like that. Anne is already Form 5. She already, in the political sense of the bigger picture, is already involved in that kind of revolution. So now we are the generations that berlapis-lapis lah keluar. So I appreciate the big picture and also trying to now learn history in a way of what happened during the time. So I remember 1985 because I'm Form 5. And what then my decision when I go to Malaya and all the discrimination, and I want to rise up because people there said that, welcome to Malaysia. And I know a little bit that we are Malaysia. But when I go there, I'm not welcome. And what is that? What is the meaning of this? So I think questioning and thinking deeper is very important. Yeah, so for my like personal reaction or feeling from this session.
For me, it was a very eye-opening lecture in a way because I really like the personal perspective you put into it because we were not really born in this timeline. I came out in 1994, so usually we only hear about this happened in the past, so we could not really relate to it. I have not been very in touch with my Sabahan side. I don't know, it's due to my parents' upbringing, especially my father. His parents were both educators. So, they might be influenced by all the British era. So all my father and his siblings, they studied overseas. So all me and my cousins, we can speak zero Dusun. Some of us can understand, some cannot understand at all. So because they educated us in a way that you must learn English. So that is how it has influenced our upbringing. I was more exposed to, Western culture or whatever. It did not help that when my father went overseas, we studied in India. So I started my studying there. So my mom forced us to speak English at home. I spoke English at my school. So when I came back, I did not even know Sabah had Lago Negeri. So when I attended my first day of school, I was like, wow, what's this song? So it's really interesting to see how all this has influenced how Sabah is now. And what I heard just now just made it very personal. There's a bit of anger, resentment towards the outsiders who messed up or whatever was going on in Sabah. So but I think there's hope for the future because the new generation, we are more aware. I think like we have people like all of you now who are working hard to educate the newer people. So I think that's all probably. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. You guys should give a round of applause to yourselves. Thank you for those online hanging in there in front of a computer. Much appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Ilan. I'm sure everybody is thanking Ilan. Can you give Ilan a big hand? Can we give Ilan a big hand? Thank you forever and ever, Sabah.